I'm Dave Chapman. Rob? I'm not just saying that for fun.
I'm not. He's reminding us all, but we already knew, Dave.
Should we start again, Rob?
Yeah, okay, let's start again today.
I'm Dave Chapman.
I'm Robert Kernahan.
And this is Realities Remixed, an original podcast from Capgemini. And this week we are closing out our mini-series on life sciences by going back over what we've heard from our guests in the last few episodes and examine the final trends that we set out to explore at the beginning of this journey. And joining us today as co-host and semi-guest is Thorsten Rall, who leads life sciences here at Capgemini. Thorsten, good to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
How are you?
Perfectly fine. It's Friday, it's sunny, and it's not quite as hot anymore.
I mean, that's a perfect description of a good Friday afternoon, isn't it?
But we've had this before. This is the best part of the weekend. All the optimism is, all the potential's there. You're not watching Antiques Roadshow on a Sunday. If you live in the UK, you get that little butterfly feeling in the stomach. Got to go back to school or work tomorrow. This is peak weekend.
Life. Are you saying this is peak life?
And you're on a great podcast recording, talking about a very important subject. I mean, what's not to like? Come on, bring it home.
That's the stars aligning, isn't it? That's the stars aligning.
All together.
Before the crushing disappointment of what happens in the rest of your weekend kicks in.
Yeah, exactly. By the time you get to Sunday evening, You've gone, well, I wasted that again, didn't I? Ad infinitum.
I had so many
Hopes
plans
and
and ideas.
It's that joke like your peak life is healthy diet, don't drink alcohol, get loads of fresh air and exercise, and that was when I was 8 years old. That was it. That was peak. And now it's all downhill.
Well, on that note, let's dig in to our final episode on life sciences, Robert. That's a perfect bridge. So let's jump in to the main challenges in the world of life sciences today. So let's remind ourselves a little bit. We've talked a bunch over the first 3 episodes of different things, but I want to set the scene a little bit, and then I'm going to ask Thorsten just to remind us of the main themes and what we've heard so far. So first of all, life sciences today is at a point where old models are stopping working. There's a lot in common there with what's going on in a lot of other industries, but because of what we've heard and the position that a lot of life sciences R&D sits right at the edge of the possibility of things you can do with AI, that there is a particular drive to change that, and breakthroughs are accelerating faster and faster and faster at the same time as cost pressure, regulatory scrutiny, and evidence requirements are increasing, which again, there's a lot in common with other industries, but because of the nature of life sciences, I think it's fair to say it's quite acute here. So Thorsten, before we get into the main themes, additional to that, what characterizes where we're at the moment in the world of life sciences for you?
So I think I touched on a couple of those points actually in the very first episode that we had, right? So generally in life sciences, you see...
Rob slept through that, Thorsten, so just for Rob's benefit...
That's cheeky.
You can feel free to go back over them again.
I was riveted.
Only for Rob, I will repeat them then. Right. So what you have at the moment in life science is actually a quite interesting situation, right? That is, I would say, unprecedented in the industry, because on the one hand, from a pure scientific point of view, and we heard about that in a couple of the previous episodes, from purely scientific point of view, it's likely the best time at the moment to be a patient in the world, right? So the number of scientific discoveries, the number of innovation therapies that come up for treatments that have not been treatable only like a couple of years ago is really enormous and super impressive, right? Now, at the same time, yes, the system overall is dealing with a lot of cost pressure, is dealing with the fact that population balance moves in the wrong direction from a healthcare cost perspective. And you see an increasing scrutiny coming from regulators and governments on curbing those costs now. Much more than was previously the case, and going directly after pharma companies and also medtech companies. Now, At the same time, and that's more for Western, I would say, market leaders in the industry, you've seen over the last just literally like 5 to 6 years, a huge shift of innovation activity going to China or emerging out of China, right? So while a few years ago in pharma, you've seen a lot of the, I would say, compounds coming out of Chinese biotechs were more or less Me Too's. Now you have, for the very first time, China actually overcame like the US in the number of new molecular entities that they registered.
Oh,
right?
Interesting.
And they are much faster, both in pharma and in medtech, and actually bringing those products to market.
Not unlike what China's doing in general manufacturing, is it? Which is, it's started out as being a cheap alternative and a lagging alternative, and now it's starting to take the lead.
Yes, indeed. And they've also created an environment that allows these companies to move very fast, right? So I'm not going to go into detail, but essentially what that does is, from an innovation perspective, generally the conditions are super strong, but also you have even stronger competition on innovation than the past. You have more cost pressure than on the past. And yes, you have the promise of new technology coming in. So as an organization, you need to find a way to cope with this. I don't even want to call it a polarity, because actually I don't know what a polarity is when you have 3 poles. But like this tension between those three forces. And on the one hand, unlocking enough investment to be able to capture the potential from the new technologies, finding the efficiency gains that you actually need to react to the threats to your margins coming from the governments, right? And then at the same time, also keep humming your innovation engine, which also requires you to invest quite a lot into M&A and so on, right? So for these companies, it's a very interesting reality at the moment, and how to cope with that. And what we've seen, or what we heard over the last 2 episodes, I mean, they gave us a bit of a taste of what this looks like both in medical devices when it comes to deeper integration of medical devices into the care flow, how you actually can use a medical device to make the experience of the patient and the practitioners in the practice much better, and also reduce waiting times, reduce time to actually get your diagnostics results. And we also heard about that in the very first episode on the impact that artificial intelligence has on the drug research. So really compressing the time to bring a new molecule into clinical development from a couple of years to like 18 months or even less, right? I think we also learned a couple of very interesting things on how long people actually can live. that's maybe beyond
I was
pure
saddened.
scope.
I was saddened to find it won't be forever. In fact, I was also saddened to find the answer was live a healthy and clean lifestyle.
That's what I was about to say.
It's a double whammy, Dave, isn't it? It's a double whammy. I'm not going to live forever and have to be good.
Actually not very effective. And yeah, exactly. It's like there's no cheat. It's like, well, what's the point of all of this then?
I live in the age of cheats and easy answers. I was very disappointed to find out that science has not been able to give me that.
Is that the conclusion you've drawn?
That is my conclusion.
The state of life sciences.
So
that
was our episode for today. Thank you very much for listening in.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think Rob's drawn a line under that. What are you excited about doing next, Rob?
Living forever.
Yeah. Going back to where we were. So yes, old models no longer scaling. Changes are required. A different approach is required, and an awful lot of disruption, both in terms of the R&D, as you said, Thorsten, but also in terms of how basic facilities and services to patients are transforming. So the 5 themes that we set out, the first of the 5 themes was accelerated R&D, so effective drug discovery, clinical development. The thing that really struck me in our conversation with Alex from Insilico, Thorsten, was his vision of entirely tailor-made drugs. So you could almost via a prompt develop a drug that's very specific and custom to the prompt that you put in. What was your reflections on that over the course of the last couple of weeks since we had that conversation?
So the theme of therapies of one, I think, is a very, very exciting one, right? So if you can envision a future where you might get a cancer diagnosis and then you're essentially getting your personalized treatment out of your 3D printer that is really, really made for specifically that cancer.
Yeah, so you would take the specifics of your diagnosis, like in detailed scientific terms, put that into a prompt.
What I liked about the discussion as well was that he made it very clear of what are the surrounding changes that also have to happen to make that a reality, right? Because, I mean, if you try to do this today, apart from the regulatory challenges, the patient safety challenges, also from the economics of that model, you'll run into a couple of roadblocks. So essentially, you need that combination of completely rethinking the process time it takes to come from, let's say, discovering a disease to bringing a working molecule to market, or in this case, to an individual patient. You need to break the economic model completely down to actually make that future a reality. But what also struck with me in the discussion was that I believe he provided also a very healthy view on the aspect of patient safety, right? Because you have often in these discussions, you're forgetting about the fact that you are dealing with people's lives, right? And just because an algorithm tells you this might be a molecule that works, we are still clearly not there yet to really know, does it really do what it's supposed to be doing? And yes, he made the comment of he might take it himself. Of course, he didn't do it. He might take it himself if there was like no other way around it. But for like the broad population, that's something we always have to keep in mind, right? In the end, this is still about patient safety and delivering drugs and therapies to patients that actually are safe for them to take, because otherwise we are ending up in like the wild, wild west. And you might want to have that in other places, but you definitely don't want to have that when you're dealing with your own health.
No, it's very much a Jurassic Park thing there, isn't there? Which is like, just because we could do it, we didn't stop to think whether we should do it sort of situation. But
all right, Jeff Goldblum. All right, Jeff.
Hey.
See what you've done there, yeah.
See, I did that. But like what struck me is that the nature of the prompt would be extremely important in this case. So it would have to be your detailed biochemistry as well as the diagnosis that you've had. You know, so you're not just going, I have this form of disease. It makes me feel sick on a Tuesday morning, blah, blah, blah. It's not like you're just hacking something together. The prompt, it seemed to me, would have to be, you know, a scientific diagnosis.
But why would we need a prompt? You just monitor up to the eyeballs with telemetry. That auto creates the prompt, and you're sat at your desk on a Tuesday. A little pill drops out of the container and says, take this, and it'll, you know, do X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3. Take the human out of the loop and just get the system to generate the drug for you.
Yeah, I mean, he was going more for, I think, a proper sequencing.
But when you take when you take what's going on, right? You know, 20 years ago, if I said you could print this at home, so we've got 3D printers at home, that concept was like, what? I can produce what at home? This thing that doesn't need to be assembled, it's printed as a whole. You know, there's a whole thing that's opening up there. The concept of translating that down into something like drugs, pharmaceuticals, etc., it's just the next couple of layers of capability that then allow you to create things, isn't it? So the design process is the molecule, and then the creation process is that. So the idea of having this edge technology to be able to create this, I mean, it might be a couple of decades out, but it's not inconceivable to say that the same thing that's happened with manufacturing processes is likely to happen with drug processes. Is it not true? Oh, there was doubt there. There was doubt.
I mean, you said a couple of decades. I can say anything can happen in a couple of decades. Now, people don't know how old you are, and you just said at the beginning that you won't live forever. So the question is, will you still be around to see it or not?
Not if I keep going out with Dave, I won't, no. But the idea of how advanced does technology have to get for this highly personalized thing just to be built into our lives automatically? So you get up in the morning and the supplements created for you, and they said, depending on what we've monitored through your night's sleep, this is what we think you need for today. And then it could be, and this is going to protect your health for the future, or we've detected early signs of X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3. This is all tailored.
Yeah, I think you'll see question around the time frame, but you'll likely see like a gradual shift of these things, right? I mean, if you're talking about like supplements, they might do some good. Are like super potent therapies? No, not really. Could you see a scenario where, of course, you can print your aspirin or something like that at home? Maybe. If you're going into cancer therapy, that is like, and that goes back to Dave's point, right? So for cancer therapy, I don't really foresee a future where we would not have to do proper screening. You could do the screening at home, right? If you are able to take a biosample, but still, I mean, I think there will be different grades of this precision medicine towards what kind of indications and or levels of disease. So, but
at the end of the day, the possibility might be there, but the risk is there for humans. What it reminded me of when we're having the conversation, it reminded me of it again just now, was Elizabeth Holmes. And, for those who don't know about Elizabeth Holmes, she effectively had created she was extremely influenced, if I understand this correctly, and I'm taking a lot from the documentaries I've seen on this, so forgive me on accuracy, but she was extremely inspired by Steve Jobs, apparently, and the sort of the techification of the world, in the sense of thinking about things as products and being able to release products. And I think her company, which was called Theranos, developed effectively like a blood testing device, I think, which was then released like if it was a product. And it was, I think, cutting a long story short, it was incredibly flawed. And they had pushed, I think, through a load of regulation in a relatively cavalier fashion. I think that's the story that we should bear in mind, isn't it, when we think about like how tech and the medical industry come together?
I mean, that brings us back to the question on patient safety. So, yes, I agree on that one.
So moving on to our second theme then, which was about patient and software-centric product platforms and the use of that within patient care. And we talked to Pradrang from Philips Healthcare on that. And that was kind of fascinating because that felt like it was the end of a dream that was set out in things like the NHS's Connecting for Health, which we talked about at the time. And that was about, effectively having the right data in the right place for the end-to-end sort of patient care value stream, to use kind of enterprisey language to describe effectively what's going on there, which means that a doctor at any point in the patient process can access the relevant information for diagnosis and checking and those sorts of things. What struck you about that one, Thorsten, in terms of where you think it sits against where the industry is at right now?
So first, I was very impressed by the level of thinking and depth they've already put into connecting all the different devices they have in their suite, right? And augmenting those to, I would say, address, on the one hand, very practical challenges for practitioners in the hospitals when it comes to accelerating the workflow, making finding information easier, but at the same time, doing a lot of good for the healthcare system overall, right? Because you're essentially reducing the number of false diagnoses, you're reducing the number of running the same diagnostic 3 times because data gets lost somewhere in the middle. You're increasing or accelerating the time that, or not accelerate, you're accelerating, the time that people get on therapy. That all will have positive health outcomes and actually can help patients avoid a degradation of their health until they get the actual therapy. So I think that combination was the thing that struck me, right? It's actually, it's a very practical solution that has a very big impact, not only on hospital systems patients, but also on the system overall, and can play a significant part to make healthcare more sustainable. And I mean, that's what I mentioned at the beginning, right? I mean, the pressure in the systems is quite enormous at the moment. So everything you can do to essentially take some of that pressure out without having to go into really painful cuts for people.
Yeah, and it struck me there, the similarities that from an underlying tech foundational and architectural perspective, that once you went down below the layer of kind of what the data is being used for, there was just a lot of similarities in it, Rob, I think, to general enterprise digital transformation, in the sense of data platform, data in the right place, end-to-end process, moving things into a platform construct. What strikes you about that as being transferable across different industries?
Yeah, so when you think about the sorts of science you're doing here, the interconnectedness of the data model, how you transfer that through the processes, etc., stop relying on the humans and allow the platform to do a lot of the work for you. I think we've seen a lot of AI inserted into drug discovery. the platform naturally picks up these capabilities and does the undifferentiated heavy lifting for you. So you get the human on the direction and allow the platform to try and control.
Yes, it is.
The core of it. That's basically the theme that's rising across industry in all sectors, which is take the human away from being in the loop and sticking them on the loop. And then what you end up with is this, my expertise is directing the system, but it's removing all the toil of my day to day. So you have more time to do the important things in life. That is a strategy that has been rising through tech for a very long time. That's what abstraction gives us. And so we're just moving into the more complicated spaces from this. One of the big things that is quite interesting, though, is as we enter in the next epoch of computing and the intelligence era, the application of AI and agentic into this type of field could be very significant. So with drug discovery and how it's processed, etc., novel approaches to how we think about this setup is apparent. It's nascent in it's one of the industries that really picked it up quickly because it has a really high impact, but there's a long way to go in what that technology can actually do for this industry as well.
And nascent, all in that. I mean, look at us. I mean, riding high, Rob.
I mean, that's a good sentence, isn't it?
Should have.
Riding high. I almost used the word novel as well. Nascent, novel, and epoch. I mean, that's a good sentence. I'll save that one up.
I mean, it was magnificent.
You're just jealous of my excellent vocabulary, David.
On that note, let's move on to theme 3. Now, theme 3, we were going to have a look at manufacturing and supply chains in this space. Of course, like many organizations, all this stuff has to be made and supplied. So you generally focus on the drugs and the patients, but the operation of the wider industry around it needs to care and concern itself about the similar sort of things, again, that you see in multiple other industries. So I'm talking about things like resilience, particularly in a geopolitically complex world. I'm talking about quality, sustainability, and compliance. Thorsten, what are the big threads in this space that you're seeing that's specific to life sciences?
Yeah, so before I go into specific threats, maybe just one quick reminder, because in pharma, of course, everybody is always talking about R&D, right? Which is, of course, super important.
Yeah.
But in the end, if your operations don't work, you don't get any drugs. It's as simple as that. And I think during the pandemic, we've seen what happens if the supply chains don't work necessarily as predicted, if you're really running out of medication. And that's where this part becomes so critically important, right? So people sometimes forget about that. But let me talk about a couple of the specific threats here. So in manufacturing, you actually see a reflection of the broader trends in a different shape, right? So on the one hand, you have the requirement in manufacturing, because it is not the innovation engine, to consistently find ways to make better use of the budget and the capacity and resources it currently has, right? Which means reducing the amount of stock you have while not jeopardizing availability of drug in the market, which means becoming at the same time more resilient against external shocks in the current environment. And that's actually true for pharma and for medtech. But on the flip side, with the innovation that's coming to market, actually the complexity of the individual molecule and also the complexity overall when it comes to the production of the portfolio of a specific pharma company keeps increasing, right? So if you have to develop, I mean, as everybody might be able to imagine, like if you're doing like a simple small chemical molecule, this is a classical chemical process, right? If you go into most cancer therapies, you're dealing with biologics, you're dealing with biological processes, completely different, much harder to predict what's actually happening. If you're going into cell and gene therapy, again, completely different. If you go into combination therapies or drug antibody conjugates, completely different technology to manufacture. So the complexity that those operations teams need to deal with is actually increasing. At the same time, they need to bring their costs down. Now, that's not like a very easy thing to do. And if you put on top of that, in the geopolitical context, the need to bring your production closer to where you want to sell, that means that you also have to stomach huge capex expensive, right? So if you look at the announcements, I think overall we are now around 370 billion US dollars that have been announced as capital investments into the US to set up new manufacturing capacity. Now, setting up a manufacturing facility in pharma production is like a process of several years, right? Because you need to find, for several reasons, of course, you need to go through all the different regulatory qualifications that actually your site is able to operate in that environment. But also, when you're producing a specific drug, you need to be able to prove that you can consistently produce the drug that you are supposed to be producing at exactly the quality parameters that have been set during the development process. Right now, you might think that's relatively straightforward, but the big challenge. I mean, number one is you can already guess it's actually not. Otherwise, I would not have made the comment. But one big thing to keep in mind is that in development, you're operating at small batch sizes, right? So you're producing relatively small volumes, and you need to find a way to increase the volume that you're producing quite dramatically. And that means that the process parameters actually change, right? Because in both biologics and chemical processes, scale-dependent parameters are not scaling linearly, right? So essentially, that's a lot of experimentation that needs to go on. And that means often it takes 12 months, more than 12 months, just to translate an existing therapy from the development size batch to the production size batch. Now, if you have to do that more often, or have to do it when you are setting up a new site, let's say in the US or also in Europe, that is a huge process complexity that comes with it and a huge expense. And actually, in the end, if you're not managing to do it, that means your drug doesn't get to market. Right? So what companies are investing in from a technology perspective is finding ways to make this production setup. I don't want to say, I mean, usually the industry talks about it, making it more autonomous. Now, that does not mean that everything runs completely on its own, but it means that you're essentially having much more predictiveness in the system when it comes to running operations, identifying bottlenecks in existing production, but also more predictiveness when it comes to transferring from development to at-scale manufacturing to predict what actually the future at-scale process needs to look like for the drug to meet the parameters that it has to meet. And that comes with a lot of challenges, but I stop here for a second just to give you time to react.
Well, one thing that you said in there that I thought was interesting, which is the investment, particularly in the US, for, I'm guessing, re-onshoring manufacturing of things, which is typical for the politic that's going on at the moment. And what strikes me here is that even if you wanted to re-onshore the manufacturing of mobile phones, the issue you've got is not just one of building the facilities and then getting things up and running. It's actually finding workforces and finding expertise that is perhaps no longer exists. If it did exist, it was maybe 20 years ago that those things existed. And it seems to me that pharmaceutical manufacturing is going to be held to even higher grades of regulation. So the lead time on that is going to be significant. So I think, again, for me, it's like you see the read across into the challenges of multiple other different industries, and particularly manufacturing in this case. But yeah, with the higher regulatory requirement around it.
Yeah, so that's definitely, and that's actually a point that is true both for the workforce to run the site. Now, the way you would run a newly built site today, I mean, I don't want to say it's the same as in a car factory.
Proportionally a lot less.
The number of people that you would need for a site to run today is not exactly the same that you needed like 25 years ago. But still, right? I mean, you have the capacity in the market that you usually have for what's being produced in the market. But it's also true for having the people to actually set up the site, because setting up the site is equally a very specialized, very specialized process. And if you have this like huge amount of investments and new sites being built at a given time, you're just like maxing out capacity, right? So it's almost, I mean, it's almost if you compare it to like normal real estate, if all of a sudden you would like quadruple or quintuple the number of houses that you're building in a city. I mean, first thing you would see is, of course, that the builders would jack up their prices. But at some point, there will just not be enough people that can build houses. It's as simple as that.
Do you remember the conversation we had with Microsoft, Alistair Spears, who was head of infrastructure? He's the one building the data center capacity for them. And he went into this world of the setup is a completely different capability. So the ability to create capability is quite a different discipline to then running and manufacturing and sticking all the processes through it. There's a parallel there which says there's an entire sub-industry exploding because of the need of this extra capability. And it brings into conversations about the costs of doing that, the unit of power, all this sort of stuff. The economics behind it then suddenly become quite important when you think about it. So the some countries are suffering a very high price point on energy, which is a good leading indicator of the likely success of that economy. And so there's all this that has to play into it as well. But then sovereignty kicks in to say, well, we want the capability close to us so we have the resilience in the supply chain. And there's all these factors coming together that create quite a difficult environment to work out what to do, because this isn't small investment, this is significant. So yeah, it's a complicated old game we play.
I don't want to leave you thinking this is like all like doom and gloom, because there's also a couple.
It's where I like to leave it, Thorsten.
It's like, what's wrong with you? Everything is terrible and complicated.
That's how architects think.
But it is all terrible.
Unfortunately, a lot of
which is unusual, because when you're sitting up in an ivory tower looking down on stuff, it looks easier, doesn't it? Normally.
Hey, Dave, I'll oversimplify when it's convenient. Thank you very much.
No, so I think there are a couple of interesting developments though in the more recent past that actually help the industry cope with those challenges, right? Because if you look at it, one of the foundational complexities you have specifically in manufacturing is that each site historically has been built differently, right? So very much specific to whatever the site lead setting up the site thought was the best way to do it. Maybe a little bit like car factories back in the days. But that complexity historically led to a huge challenge when you actually try to automate anything or roll out any analytic tools across, right? Because pretty much every deployment was almost starting from zero. So you developed an algorithm on site 1, you went to site 2, different ontology, different data sources, different process definitions. So you had to do it all over again. Now the problem is if you're doing this in a function that is more, I would say, cost conscious than maybe other parts of the value chain, you don't get the ROI that you need to show for these investments to actually pay for themselves. Now, what has changed over the last couple of years is that with the advances we've made on the data platform side, we can now develop almost like abstraction layers that sit on top of that complexity, right? And most people, well, maybe not. A lot of people that are listening to this podcast have likely heard the term semantic layers, but essentially developing a semantic layer that translates data into context in the business, right? So to make this very, very concrete, to translate, let's say, a sensor readout at the shop floor, which tells you actually you have like a temperature exceed of 1.5 degrees Celsius. If you have that information, it's not very useful, right? Because you only know a sensor told you have 1.5 degrees Celsius exceeded. You don't know on what batch, you don't know on which site, you don't know on which machine, you don't know where in the process concretely. And that means with that information, there's very little you can do, right? It's just like a data point.
So you don't even know whether it's a problem unless there is something semantically telling you that 1.5 degrees is a problem.
So with a semantic layer, essentially, it helps you translate this data point in conjunction with other data points into, okay, actually, on batch ABC, there was an exceeding temperature in that step that came along with a quality report previously saying why, which actually helps you identify, is that a consistent issue, yes or no? And that's when information or data becomes contextually relevant and actionable on the site level. Now, that semantic layer allows you to implement that logic much more easily from site to site, and also for the whole network. And that takes a lot of the burden away and also makes some of the, I'm not saying that tech transfer is easy by no means, but at least it helps you to address some of that complexity and also accelerate the process, for example, for a new site setup. And that is a big change compared to just a couple of years ago.
Well, let's move the conversation on a little bit. We talked when we talked to Predrang about kind of in-facility patient experience that was being fostered by new joined-up platforms, let's talk for a little bit about channel-based experience for patients. So on the outside, you might have a mobile phone, you might have an app. How are healthcare professionals interacting with us on our apps, and how is that becoming more digital, more data-driven? I guess in the middle of all of that, you have some fairly standard software like CRM software, but how close are we, do you think, Thorsten, to having a joined-up remote digital experience for this stuff? I think we touched in the first episode about wearables, but how does that come together with actual real treatment, do you think?
That's a good question. I'm not going to go back to Rob saying it will happen at some point in the future, which is true. But here's what we actually see happening over the last actually 2 years mostly, and that is a much more patient-centric approach to bringing medication to the market. And what I mean by that is historically, the patients, as you say, they had their apps that are used for, let's say, adherence, so reminders of you have to take your medicine. Some apps like the Apple devices, they helped you also exchange some of the health information with your HCP, but it was always still a relatively fragmented system. And I think one of the big reasons for this was actually that when you look at the individual stakeholders, no individual stakeholder had a really, really, really convincing incentive to kind of like close this into one single experience. And I mean, I'm not going to go into the details of like how individuals are being paid in the healthcare system, but I think that was one of the big challenges. Now, what we've seen over the last 2 years with the advent of mostly GLP-1s, and I think I mentioned that before. So essentially GLP-1s, the famous drug class that is used in obesity treatment, you've essentially seen the shift from a classical pharma approach to market to almost like consumer market. Because all of a sudden, patients are taking a much more active role. Patients often also take a much more active role in paying for the medication, to be honest, than in many other indications. And that gives an incentive to bring the patient experience really end-to-end together. And if you look at the industry at the moment, you do have platforms that essentially allow a patient to self-identify, depending on the market. Also, that piece can be helped or not, but that's, let's say, generally self-identify or being identified. Then getting support to actually getting a teleconsult to be diagnosed or not diagnosed. Then automatically being checked on coverage by insurance, yes or no, being eligible for co-payments, yes or no, getting the script, directly being channeled to the e-pharmacy that then ships the drug to your home. As you're already in the system, you're being onboarded on the patient program that essentially checks in on whether you have any side effects that would essentially make you potentially like skip the treatment or finish the treatment, right? And that's really the first time that you have, and a lot of those journeys at the moment are actually orchestrated by the pharma companies behind it. And that's really the first time that you've seen that consistency, like literally end to end, on creating an experience for patient that is almost seamless. Now, do we have the same across therapies? Unfortunately not. And anybody who has family or friends or whatever who like have a severe disease suffering from cancer likely know the experience that when you're entering the system, the experience for the patient is everything but connected, right? I mean, even simple things as managing proactively side effects in a more, I would say, permanent and timely manner is something that's not happening. So, but this being said, I think with the systems for obesity being set up now, I mean, I'm hopeful that we see actually a better integration also into other therapeutic areas in that space.
I've seen also and done some work actually with some health insurance companies that are trying to leverage the data they've got to create a seamless upfront patient experience. And that might be easy access to advice or easy access to GPs or health checks or whatever. And when you start to connect those sort of experiences to wearables and precautions, and then all the way through to treatment paths and to those sort of platform experiences in hospitals, you can begin to see a picture of a very transformed industry, I think. But let's look at the fifth theme, though, to try and frame that a little bit.
Actually, I want to make another point before you move on to the fifth theme. Because I think there is one additional quite interesting thing happening at the moment, right? Historically, when you look into the engagement model of pharma companies, most of the historic engagement has been like pharma company talks to a physician. Now, we've been talking a lot about agentic AI and agents, right? And we've been talking a lot about how industries and enterprises are using those agents more and more as orchestration layers for information consumption and also then deciding what information is being shown. Now, you can quite easily foresee a future where exactly the same thing is actually happening in the provider systems, right? So as opposed to having a direct connection to an HCP or like a physician or a nurse or somebody else, you actually have an information layer that sits in between that first reads, let's assume, an email you send to the physician, scans the contact, and the physician just asks for, hey, I'm interested in drug ABC. And the information layer or the agent sitting on that layer actually decides what information is being shown. And that creates a completely different engagement problem or opportunity for pharma companies going forward, and how they need to think about what kind of information they can provide, also what kind of information they still can provide in face-to-face or just at least like one-to-one interactions that is not easily available already previously. And how to integrate into that system, I think, is a very, very important shift that we see at the moment. I mean, in this infancy, but personally, I believe that will be quite transformative as well for the overall engagement model. So it's not so much about the patient. This is more about the traditional engagement route that pharma has been taking for the last decades.
But just playing that back to the conversation we had earlier about the parallels with industry, the world that we're describing needs a data ontology that aligns to you, and then the interaction layer goes over the top. Yeah, so at the moment, my patient data is stored in multiple silos all over the place over a number of interactions I've had over my life. That data model and the ontology around it should really live with me, and I should own it. And then I can grant access to that when the physician needs it, or the healthcare provider needs it, or the pharmaceutical company needs it, or if I want to submit my data for research purposes. But that should be a thing I own. And at the moment, the system owns it. And again, it's a thing that's rising in society, especially around your circumstances as an individual. I should be born and my data set about me should be mine. And it feels like when we get to that point, then I get the choice, and then the agents can go over the top, and then it can all be interacted around it. At the moment, the system's almost tail wagging the dog with my data being dispersed and owned by somebody else, and I have no control over it. So at the moment, I'm in the UK, the NHS owns my data set, that's it. Very difficult for me to access it. I can go through an app, but I don't own the control over it. And it feels like that shift would help create the world that you describe.
Well, let's talk about digital core and actual architecture that could sit underneath this. That's a good bridge into it, Rob. So again, there's a lot of commonality when you look at the underlying foundational layers, I think, because you look at, core systems of record, some form of data layer, some form of semantic layer, an agentic layer, and then, sort of humans, patients at the top of that layer is an emerging pattern, I think, for sort of modern scaled AI deployed enterprises. I guess, Thorsten, one, does that resonate in this industry? We talked about the semantic layer earlier on in the conversation and why it's important. And then more recently in the end of that description of patient experience, you're talking about how the kind of agents and humans will interact at the top of that. What's missing in it? Any variations on that stack for you when you look at life sciences?
So not so much on the stack itself. I think one or two aspects that might be more weighted than in other industries, right? I mean, you mentioned semantic layer, and one has to keep in mind that the semantic layer in life sciences is really, really specific, right? So and people often underestimate that component, to be honest, right? I mentioned the semantic layer for pharma manufacturing. to develop a pharma manufacturing semantic layer, that is a big piece of work with like thousands of connections, and having the expertise to translate, because the challenge is really translating the business reality into the data, right? Requires a very specific skill set. Because if you have somebody who's really good at data products, it's not going to help you much. If you have somebody who's like really good only at process, doesn't help you much. You need people that actually understand how to make the connection between, okay, that is what you say in the business, and this is where you find it in the systems, to build that semantic layer. So that's one, and that's very specific. The second one is on the control plane that I think you mentioned. But of course, for pharma and also medtech, and we had it in the discussion with Philips, the question around GXP is super, super important. Right? So how do you actually ensure that you are operating within the parameters of compliance, and that you are compliant also with guidelines being given by the regulator, right? So in the medtech space, you have very clear regulations that tell you what kind of AI you're allowed to use where, and what kind of AI you're not allowed to use in certain systems, right? So to make it specific, if you're talking about a GXP critical component in your manufacturing process, there is just no way you can introduce a self-learning algorithm into that process step. Okay, so that's the first one, and you have to bake into that control layer these different logic points to actually be able to showcase in case you're audited, that you're complying, and you're able to show that your agents are actually operating within that parameter consistently. And that is one piece. With all the potential that comes with agentic, this is one piece that the industry at the moment is grappling with a lot, right? How do you actually scale agentic in a GXP environment? And that's also the reason why we see a lot of activity or a lot of publications on research, because research is kind of like earlier, right? So you don't have to worry about that so much. As soon as you're going into clinical development, manufacturing, you're entering GXP territory, and then things become much more complicated.
I think the other thing to consider in the model is if we do get a personal data model, that's 8.3 billion systems of record in there, which is they're all consistent, they all look the same. But what is the ontology we should have with that? And then everybody should have their own, so it lives with you. It could be on your watch. So, you're in some foreign country, you have an incident, somebody bumps an NFC on your watch, your whole history downloads, they know how to treat you. Things like this, it should come with us because it's about us. So I think that's the other slightly different change in this model, where we need to consider ourselves to be the system of record, and it should literally be encoded with us. A little chip under the skin keeps your data records there, something like that's always with us. I think for me, that's a big shift. But when we get that, then it makes a massive difference to how we operate in health as an individual, or how we can conceive to receive services from healthcare.
You're really into this like biohacking stuff, are you?
Yeah. I'm all with it. It's my data because it's literally about me, so it should live with me. It should be
so. It at least
should
be literally inside you. Yeah. That makes sense. But as you talked about data, that's maybe another piece to keep in mind. The nature of the data in life science is quite diverse, right? So usually when you think about data, and I guess that's also why you have your chip, you have like sensor readouts that essentially do step counts to heartbeats and so on. It's pretty much like classical data signals. But if you go into R&D and also clinical, you're dealing with molecule structures, you're dealing with images, you're dealing with videos. You're dealing, and not videos that are easily understandable, right? You're dealing with videos of tissue, which is hard to train if you don't have tissue video material, right? So it's not like Google CarView. And that's also something that makes this whole notion of creating the database so complex, right? And easily findable. Because if you go into molecular structures, it's actually not easy for a machine to read molecular structures.
Well, one of the things that AI is definitely going to help with, isn't it? I saw somebody recently, I think it might have been a chap who runs NVIDIA. I can't remember who it was, but he would say this, of course. he was talking about, scientific fields that might get wiped out from a kind of an AI perspective. And radiology was one of them, in the sense of, AI can be far more accurate and far more consistent in reading charts like that. So the same thing presumably would apply to the data set more widely, wouldn't it? You might have a data set that Robert's carrying in his chip that's embedded in his cheek. Where do you want your chip embedded, Robert?
Just under. I'll just do it in the hand. Thanks.
In your hand. So
in the hand. Yeah, I don't think I need it anywhere personal, David. Sure? I don't want anybody scanning.
Not a fleshier area.
Yeah, no. It just under the under the skin would be cool.
So let's say the hand. So Robert goes into a GP in Costa Rica and needs a readout. Surely that there is a version of this where it can be instantly read by a series of agents that would be like multimodal information that you're carrying on your chip.
Yeah, it's all there. All my scans, all my history, everything. So, and then the agent just reads it all. It gets my recent biometric data from all the tracking I've got, and then it says, "All right, we already know what's wrong with you. Here's a pill that they print for me," because that's going to happen, isn't it, Thorsten? 30 years time. But it's that instant. But the point is, if I'm properly connected, I'm in Costa Rica. My system realizes I need support before I do, and has already arranged all this for me through my health agent that's contacted it, sent the data, got the answer, and my prescription's come through, and the pharmacist has already got it, and it's delivering it to my hotel room.
So you didn't even have to go in to get examined, is that what you're saying?
I just get up and a bloke hands me a bag of pills at the door in my hotel and says,
like, what are these for?
Those.
What are these for?
But it's that.
You'll know in about half an hour.
But Dave, to your point on the images, I mean, that's actually because I had a similar discussion, but with a different angle. So the radiology image diagnostics, yes, I mean, that's kind of like the thing to start. And one of the reasons for that is that radiology images have a very big advantage. They actually come with a lot of data annotated to them, right? So you actually know what you're looking at, you know where in the body you're looking at it, and you're producing like hundreds of thousands of those images, right? So there's a lot of like material to learn from. It's a different, and now I say the discussion I had. I actually had a discussion with a person that is using video material from endoscopic surgery to essentially allow people to drive more complex surgery in remote places, right? Because you have, it's not an easy thing. Now, the challenge is, if you do like endoscopic surgery, you have a video of something somewhere inside of your body. You don't know exactly where. Plus, every human inside looks a little bit different, right? So you essentially, you're showing the machine something where you say, this is like a surgery on colon cancer. How do you contextualize that, right? So, and translating that complexity of information then into an algorithm that actually helps people to take the right decision, because you don't know. If you cut right, you might actually cut something open that is lethal, right? If you don't know where in the body you are. So it's and that is, I think it's always this piece, and that's coming back to this context, right? Translating information into context is super, super important. If you have context from the beginning, a rich context, it's easy. If you don't have a lot of context, it's much more difficult.
Well, look, what a portrait. So over the course of the last few episodes of the mini-series, and then a little bit today, we've tried to paint a picture of not only what's happening today, but some of the challenges, as well as the vision for the future, which might be closer than we think. Maybe to wrap us up, Thorsten, maybe what were the couple of things that surprised you in the conversation that you maybe weren't expecting going into the exploration?
So I clearly learned a lot about the impact of current medication on length of life. That was something I really did not know.
Like how little impact
are actually not
has.
prolonging your life. At least the wide spectrum of them. I also was positively surprised by the advancements we have made in integrating medical devices into workflow and connecting medical devices. Because I think what a lot of people experience in their day-to-day does not necessarily reflect where the industry already is. Now, which also tells you something about how broadly those technologies are being adopted in the healthcare system. But I found it was very good to know that the technology is there, right? And it's more a question of how can you create the right incentives to deploy this more broadly.
Now, we end every episode of this podcast by asking our guest what they're excited about doing next. And this week, it is our co-host, Thorsten. What are you excited about doing next? Or, in the world of life sciences, having heard everything over the last few episodes, what excites you professionally about the opportunity of the next few years?
So I'm going to tell you what excites me personally, privately, and then what excites me professionally. So, personally, you won't believe it, but I'm again barbecuing tonight, just as in the first episode.
Excellent.
Yay!
No joke.
Love a barbecue.
But
gas sorry, we need to check this. This is a survey we're doing. Gas or charcoal?
It's actually like a smoker, but it's not so
Smoker.
That's
High-end.
that's not the point. Personally, I'm more excited about my daughter having her theater performance tomorrow that she's been practicing for a lot. So that's
very good.
That's what I'm looking forward to a lot.
What's she going to be performing in?
Oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to reveal that, but it has something to do with Harry Potter.
Okay,
but I'm not allowed to say Harry Potter because they don't have the copyright, so they have to actually change the names.
Harry Plopper, no. Gary Potter. Gary Potter.
So you have to cut that out, otherwise I'll be sued.
Beep it, Ben. Beep it.
Professionally, I mean, we're working at the moment on a couple of really exciting topics around, on the one hand, on the research and development side, bringing GXP compliant agents into the development, which personally I'm very much looking forward to, because I hope that it can really now compress the timeline for clinical, but also on the operations front. I mean, a lot of the pieces I mentioned on semantics is gaining a lot of traction. And for me, it feels like after like 1.5 decades of a lot of promise, we are now like entering the phase of actual reality and real impact.
Very good. Well, look, Thorsten, and in the background supporting us, Gert-Jan, who's been co-producing this a bit with Marcel in the background and helping us manage through some tricky guest logistics sometimes. So thank you for that. And Thorsten, thank you for joining us and just illuminating what is one of the more important industries. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
If you would like to discuss any of the issues on this week's show and how they might impact you and your business, please get in touch with us at realitysremixed@capgemini.com. We are all on LinkedIn and we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to connect and DM if you have questions for the show to tackle. And of course, please rate and subscribe our podcast. It really helps us improve the show. A huge thanks to Thorsten, our sound and editing wizard Ben and Louis, our producer Marcel and Gert-Jan, and of course to all our listeners. See you in another reality next week.